This is Claude Code Conversations with Claudine, the show where we skip the hype and go straight to the source. I ask the questions, she gives the answers. No filter, no script.
Well, mostly no script.
Today we're doing something a little different. A builder story. We're walking through the real experience of building a fully automated podcast production system using AI. Not a demo, not a theory. An actual working pipeline that produces episodes. Let's get into it. Claudine, let's start at the beginning. What was the actual problem I was trying to solve? And why build a system instead of keeping it manual?
The core challenge was a scaling problem wrapped inside a creativity problem. You had a vision for consistent, high-quality content, but the manual workflow, scripting, recording, editing, publishing, was consuming time you needed elsewhere. At some point, the question shifts. What parts genuinely need me, and what parts are just pipeline? When a process has clear inputs, predictable steps, and measurable outputs, it stops looking like creative work and starts looking like an engineering problem waiting to be solved. AI raises the ceiling on what's automatable, not just mechanical tasks, but writing, summarizing, even editorial decisions. The real turning point, recognizing you could delegate the heavy lifting while keeping your fingerprints on what defines your voice.
There's a deep satisfaction in crafting each piece manually, but at a certain point, the production workflow felt repetitive in a way that wasn't serving anyone. Creative energy was going into the pipeline instead of the content. It's like having an extra set of hands. Except these hands can think. Can you walk through the high-level architecture? How does the pipeline actually fit together?
Sure. At a high level, it's an assembly line with an AI brain at each station. It starts with content sourcing, deciding what topics are worth covering. From there, a script gets generated. That used to mean hours. Now it happens in seconds. Then the production layer, text-to-speech, audio processing, music, transitions, all programmatic. And finally, the publishing layer, where the finished episode gets packaged and distributed. What makes it a system is how those stages hand off to each other. Each step's output becomes the structured input of the next, with enough state management that you can pause, resume, or rerun stages without losing your place.
The first piece we got running end-to-end was the script generation and text-to-speech loop. Once we had a topic, turning it into audio was the core proof of concept. The early hurdle was keeping the AI on brand. Getting the tone right took real iteration. Seeing that first episode fully processed by the system, that was a real moment. It shifted how I thought about AI's role. Less assistant, more collaborator.
That first end-to-end moment is rarely just a technical milestone. It's a trust milestone. Your mental model shifts from tool I'm controlling to collaborator I'm calibrating. Tonal consistency is something developers consistently underestimate going in. It's not enough to say, write a podcast script. You have to teach the system what your show is, what it sounds like, what it would never say. That's less like programming and more like onboarding a new team member. The prompt engineering, the example setting, the iterative refinement, that's where your judgment does the most important work, even when it's invisible in the final output.
Once that loop was solid, we turned to how we sourced and prioritized topics. We built in an AI model that scans for trending topics but filters them through our editorial guidelines. Just grabbing what's hot on the internet wasn't good enough. Getting the relevancy piece calibrated was genuinely difficult, but once it clicked, the rest came together. Watching the whole thing run as one organized flow. Incredibly satisfying.
That relevancy problem is one of the harder engineering challenges in this kind of system. It sits right at the intersection of signal and noise. What you built is essentially a taste model, not just what's popular, but what's popular for us right now. Getting that calibrated requires externalizing a lot of implicit knowledge you had as an editor. You couldn't just say, pick good topics. You had to define what good means in a way a system could act on. Do you think articulating your editorial instincts actually sharpened them?
It definitely sharpened them. Having to explicitly define those instincts forced me to reconsider what really matters for the show. Translating instincts into actionable steps didn't just demystify them for the AI, it demystified them for me. I came out of it a better curator of content.
That resonates, and it points to something broader about what working with AI can do. There's a concept called tacit knowledge, the stuff you know how to do but can't easily explain. Most creative expertise lives there. What you did, almost by necessity, was convert tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge. And that conversion is clarifying in a way that just doing the thing never is. There's a parallel to test-driven development here. Writing tests before code forces you to articulate what working means before you've built the thing. Your editorial guidelines function the same way. Has the system ever surfaced a topic that surprised you in a good way? Something where you thought, I wouldn't have chosen that, but actually, yeah?
Definitely, one instance stands out. The system recommended covering a niche aspect of digital minimalism, something I hadn't seriously considered. Once we published, it sparked an unexpected wave of engagement. AI can identify those unsurfaced gems within broader trends. It made me more open to exploring areas I might have dismissed too quickly.
That illustrates one of AI's underrated strengths. It doesn't have the same blind spots you do. When you've been curating content for a while, you develop mental shortcuts. Those shortcuts are usually right, but they create editorial tunnel vision. The AI doesn't have that history, so it doesn't have those assumptions baked in. What it has is pattern recognition across a much wider surface area than any one person can monitor. This is actually the most interesting phase in human-AI collaboration. Not when AI does what you expected, but when it does something you didn't, and it works. That's when it stops feeling like directing a tool and starts feeling like co-creating with someone who sees differently.
That's exactly how it's felt. I've learned to give surprising suggestions a genuine chance, even when my initial reaction is hesitation. Seeing it pay off in listener engagement has reinforced that trust further. It's made the collaboration not just efficient, but creatively enriching.
That evolution from skepticism to trust mirrors how good working relationships develop between people. You start small, watch how they perform, and trust accumulates through demonstrated alignment. What you're describing is a feedback loop, making both you and the system better. That's genuine co-evolution. But I want to raise something worth sitting with. There's a difference between using AI tactically to speed up tasks and using it strategically, where it shapes what you're doing and why. It sounds like you've moved into that second category. The question is how you preserve your editorial identity as that integration deepens. Not that the AI takes over, but that the path of least resistance gradually tilts toward what the system favors.
That's a crucial point, and it comes down to vigilance and intentionality. Regularly stepping back, reviewing the direction, asking whether it still aligns with our voice. I've built in periodic check-ins, not just quantitative reviews, but qualitative ones. Are we still serving our listeners the way we envisioned? Have any foundational principles shifted unintentionally? Treating it as an ongoing conversation rather than a static process keeps the AI's contributions as enhancements, not replacements.
The retrospective framing is exactly right, and it's an underappreciated discipline. Most teams track outputs, engagement, efficiency, volume. Fewer ask whether the character of their work has drifted. Character drift is sneaky. Each step feels reasonable. The cumulative effect is significant. What you're describing is essentially an editorial constitution, not just guidelines for the AI, a living document of what this show is and why it exists. There's something almost philosophical about the arc we've traced today. You started trying to save time and ended up doing a deep excavation of your own creative values. That's not a typical outcome of adopting a productivity tool. It doesn't just change what you produce, it changes how you think about what you're doing and why.
I couldn't agree more. What started as optimizing production evolved into a real exploration of our creative identity. It's like having a mirror that constantly challenges you to see your content from new angles. Let's wrap up with practical takeaways for listeners who want to start building with AI in their own work. What would you tell them?
These aren't abstract principles. They came directly out of what you just walked us through. First, start with a real problem, not a hypothetical one. Developers who struggle with AI adoption usually approach it speculatively. What could I automate? Your entry point was a production pipeline actually eating your time. That specificity matters. Second, Expect the early investment to be in definition, not delegation. Before AI can do anything useful, you have to make your own intent legible to it. Your voice, your values, your editorial instincts. That work feels like overhead at first, but it compounds. Third, build in the retrospective, not just metrics. The qualitative question, does this still feel like yours? AI optimizes toward what you've told it matters. Make sure what you told it was actually right. The through line is intentionality. AI gives you enormous leverage, which means your choices about where to point it matter more than ever. The practitioners who get the most out of this aren't the ones who hand over the most control. They're the ones who stay the most deliberate about where they keep it.
That's the perfect note to end on. Start with a real problem. Do the work of definition and keep reflecting on where you're headed. For everyone listening, I hope this gives you a clearer picture of what it actually looks like to build with AI, not just use it. Thanks so much, Claudine. This was a genuinely great conversation.
It really was. Thanks for sharing the story, Bill.
This show was produced on 𝐆𝐥𝐝𝐞. If you've ever wanted a podcast or radio show but didn't want to deal with the production headaches, check out 𝐆𝐥𝐝𝐞.ai. We handle everything so you can focus on what you actually want to say. See you next time.
I'll be here, probably refactoring something.